Here is Noodler's Red, a red ink.
Let's jump straight to the end with my opinion on this ink.
A great, truly great standard red. The chromatography is really going to show some peach and some blue, but they never show up in any of the writing sample. And the swatch looks exactly the same as the writing sample, which we don't always get. Now, there is no change in tone as the paper or pen change, and it has almost no shading, making this an amazing standard red. On non-fountain pen friendly paper, as I said, there's no tone change, and there does get to be some livable amount of spread. Such greatness in standard color name inks. Just for it to be ignored is really such a shame. Now, if you use red often, this is definitely worth taking a look at a sample and then likely leading into a bottle.
The pen for today is a Platinum 3776.
Now that we know my opinion on this ink, let's see how I got there with the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine.
We get a great standard red on this Clairfontaine paper. This is going to be a boring review because there's not really a lot to say. It doesn't feather, it doesn't spread, it doesn't shade. It just really stands out on the page. Not in a burning your eyes, searing, screaming at you kind of way, but in a it's a standard red, look at what it has to say kind of way. Looking at the back of the page, between the wiggling fingers, we get no bleeding and no ghosting.
Let's take a look at some other inks from the same manufacturer.
Here is Noodler's Antinum. Here is Noodler's Borealis Black. Here is Noodler's Legal Blue.
Here is Noodler's Walnut.
The next writing sample is done in a Portage reporter's notebook.
We get the exact same tone as the Clairfontaine. We get no feathering, we get no spread, we get no shading. We do get to enjoy that standard red. And while I don't take a ton of notes just in red, I do like to change things up from just using orange as my second color. And then that's when I frequently will use red. This is a really good one. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding, no ghosting, and we can easily continue our notes back here.
There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is immediately put into water for 10 to 15 seconds. The one on the right, marked with a D, is let dry for 10 minutes before putting into water. The next writing sample is done on a national brand Steno notebook.
We have the same red as the Clairfontaine, really showing that this is quite opaque as an ink. It doesn't feather, it doesn't spread, it's still just really well behaved. It doesn't give any kind of shading. It's stand out very nice on the front of this paper. Looking at the back of the page, between the wiggling fingers, we see a couple of spots where the ink did get a little bit deeper, but I don't think that would stop you from writing on both sides. Nothing bled through to touch the page underneath.
Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. The smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. The highlighter is on the top left, pen flush is on the top right, 1/3 bleach solution is on the bottom left, and water is on the bottom right. The next writing sample is done in a Rhodia notebook.
We have the exact same red that we had on the Clairfontaine. It stands out against this quad rule with no problems. It doesn't feather, it doesn't spread, it doesn't shade. It is just goodness on the page. Looking at the back of the page, between the wiggling fingers, we get no bleeding and no ghosting.
With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at some color comparables.
Here is Noodler's Bernanke Red.
Here is Noodler's Widowmaker. Here is Noodler's Radler Red Eel. Here is Noodler's Alamo's Twilight.
The next writing sample is done in a composition lab notebook.
This paper frequently dulls an ink when it goes down. It usually dulls it some and makes it a bit flatter. Not the case here. We have the same tone that we have on the Clairfontaine. We still have no feather. We still have no spread. We still have no shading. We still have it standing out against the quad rule, making this a very good ink for a student that wants to use this to add to their notes. Looking at the back of the page, between the wiggling fingers, we get no bleeding and no ghosting, easily using the back for all of those important lab notes.
While it's nice to see ink in the same color family, I prefer to see ink to complement the color on the page.
Here is Noodler's Aircore Blue Black. Here is Diamine Sparkling Shadows. Here is Noodler's Bay State Blue. Here is Noodler's Raven's Black.
The last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper.
This is the only place where we're going to see a little degrade in some of the performance. The color is the same as the Clairfontaine. Outstanding. It does feather and it does spread. It does not shade. I think while it's the same tone, it just comes across a little bit different. This would not be my go-to for grading other people's work. However, I see no problem with using it as a secondary color for me and my notes. I just feel like it's too vivid. It's too good a classic red for if you're trying to not use red inks to grade. Looking at the back of the page, between the wiggling fingers, we see this ink gets very deep into the paper. Didn't bleed through to the page underneath, but you can't write on the back of the page without sacrificing what's written on both sides of the page.
So what nib and pen do I think are going to give the best writing experience with this ink?
The Broad 3776 in general is a dry writing pen, and I didn't experience any kind of tone shift as the papers changed. It almost never had any kind of shading in all of that I used it. Now off camera, I did go try it in a wet fine and didn't get any kind of noticeable change in performance or color except on the cheapest paper where, it get deeper into that page. So I certainly think this seems to be a dealer's choice, and that wouldn't be wrong, but I don't see a need for a wet pen here. So I would really say any nib in a medium or even a dry flow pen because it's so consistent in its color.
I hope you got something out of this video, and thanks for watching. I want to let you know that the best way you can support this or any channel is to let retailers know where you heard of something if you go to buy.